The blood drops hit the wooden floor before Caroline Walsh could stop them, her raw knuckles splitting open again as she scrubbed the saloon's grimy planks in Abilene, Kansas. And she bit her lip hard to keep from crying out because she could not afford to lose this job too. It was March 1878, and the winter had been brutal, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination that refused to die no matter how many times this town tried to break her. She had arrived in Abilene 6 months ago after her father's death, believing she could make something of herself, but the reality of being a 22-year-old woman alone in a cattle town had proven harsher than any Kansas winter. The saloon owner, a cruel man named Brennan, paid her barely enough to rent a corner in a boarding house basement, and he worked her from dawn until well past midnight every single day. Her hands trembled as she dipped the brush back into the bucket, the lye soap stinging the open wounds on her fingers. She had wrapped them in strips of cloth that morning, but the fabric had long since soaked through with blood and dirty water. The pain was constant now, a burning throb that radiated up her arms, but she kept scrubbing because Brennan had threatened to dock her pay if she did not finish the entire floor before the evening crowd arrived. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deep and steady, cutting through the empty saloon like a knife. Caroline's head snapped up, her heart racing because patrons were not supposed to arrive for another 2 hours, and she was terrified it might be Brennan coming to criticize her work again. Instead, she found herself looking at a tall cowboy standing in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun. He stepped inside, and she could see him more clearly. A man perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore dusty trail clothes and a worn leather vest, and there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of capability and quiet strength. "We are not open yet," Caroline said quickly, trying to hide her bleeding hands behind her skirt. "You will have to come back later." The cowboy did not leave. Instead, he walked closer, his boots echoing on the half-cleaned floor and his eyes narrowed as he looked at her more carefully. "Your hands are bleeding." "It is nothing," she lied, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Just a bit of hard work." He crouched down beside her, and before she could protest, he gently took one of her hands in his. His touch was surprisingly careful, and Caroline found herself frozen, unable to pull away as he examined the raw, bleeding skin. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek, and when he looked up at her, there was something fierce in his expression that made her breath catch. "This is not nothing," he said quietly. "This is cruelty. How long have you been working like this?" Caroline tried to tug her hand free, but he held on, not roughly but firmly enough that she could not escape. "I need this job," she whispered. "Please, if my employer sees you here, if he thinks I have been wasting time talking instead of working." "Your employer is a bastard," the cowboy interrupted, his voice hard. He finally released her hand and stood up, offering her his other hand to help her to her feet. "I am Nathaniel Cross. I own a cattle ranch about 15 miles west of here, and I came to town looking for a partner." Caroline stared at him, confusion mixing with a desperate, foolish hope that she immediately tried to crush. "A partner? I do not understand." "I need someone to help me run my ranch," Nathaniel said, his eyes never leaving hers. "The work is hard, I will not lie to you about that, but it is honest work. I need someone who can keep books, help manage supplies, assist with the horses, and eventually help me expand the operation. I have been doing it alone since my father died 2 years ago, and I am at the point where I need help or I will lose everything I have built." "But you do not know me," Caroline protested, her heart hammering in her chest. "I could be anyone. I could be a thief or a liar, or you are someone who keeps working even when her hands are bleeding," Nathaniel said simply. "You are someone with courage and determination, and that is worth more to me than any reference letter. I am offering you a job as my business partner. You would have your own room in the ranch house, 3 meals a day and a fair share of the profits. 20% to start, and if things go well, we can renegotiate after a year. Caroline felt dizzy. This had to be some kind of trick or trap. Men did not just offer women partnerships in their ranches. They offered marriage or dishonor, but not respect and honest work. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you really want from me?" Nathaniel's expression softened slightly, and he reached up to remove his hat, holding it in his hands. "My mother ran our ranch alongside my father for 20 years before she passed. She was the smartest person I ever knew, and she taught me that capability has nothing to do with whether you wear trousers or a skirt. I need a partner I can trust, someone who understands what hard work means. You were scrubbing floors until your hands bled rather than give up. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Before Caroline could respond, heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs from the upper floor, and Brennan appeared, his face already red with anger. "What the hell is going on here?" he bellowed. "Walsh, why are you standing around chatting when you should be working? And you, get out of my establishment if you are not here to drink." Nathaniel turned to face Brennan, and Caroline saw his entire demeanor change. Where he had been gentle with her, he now radiated a cold authority that made even Brennan hesitate. "I am here to offer Miss Walsh employment," Nathaniel said, his voice level but hard as iron. "She will be leaving with me today." "Like hell she will," Brennan sputtered. "She owes me for room and board, and she has not finished her work. Caroline, get back to scrubbing right now, or you will be out on the street with nothing." Caroline's mind raced. This was insane. She should stay here, keep her head down, keep scrubbing floors until her hands were nothing but scars and her spirit was broken. That was the safe choice, the sensible choice. But when she looked at Nathaniel, at the steady confidence in his eyes and the respect with which he had treated her, something inside her chest cracked open. "I quit," she heard herself say, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff. "I am leaving, Mr. Brennan." Brennan's face turned purple. "You ungrateful little witch. After everything I have done for you. You will regret this, mark my words. No one else in this town will hire you, and you will come crawling back within a week." "She will not need to," Nathaniel said calmly. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out several coins which he tossed onto the nearest table. "That is for any wages owed. Now Miss Walsh and I will be leaving." Caroline grabbed her threadbare shawl from a peg by the door, which represented nearly everything she owned in the world except for a spare dress and a few personal items back at the boarding house. Nathaniel must have seen something in her face because he said quietly, "Do you have belongings elsewhere?" "At the boarding house on 3rd Street, she admitted. "But it is not much, just a dress and a few things that belong to my mother. We will get them," Nathaniel said. A person's memories are never not much. They left the saloon together, stepping out into the bright afternoon sunshine, and Caroline felt as though she were walking through a dream. Abilene's Main Street was busy with afternoon traffic, cowboys and townspeople going about their business, and no one paid any attention to the bleeding woman and the rancher walking side by side toward the boarding house. The landlady was surprised to see Caroline in the middle of the day, but handed over her small carpet bag without argument when Caroline explained she was leaving. Everything Caroline owned fit into that single bag, and as Nathaniel carried it for her to where his horse was hitched outside the general store, she felt a sharp pang of fear mixed with exhilaration. "I have a wagon outside of town where I loaded my supplies," Nathaniel explained. "I rode in on scout here because I had a few quick errands. Can you ride?" "I used to," Caroline said. "My father had a horse when I was young before he got sick, but I have not ridden in years." Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully, then swung up into his saddle with easy grace. He secured her carpet bag behind him, then reached down with his hand. "Give me your foot and your hand. You can ride with me until we get to the wagon." Caroline hesitated for only a moment before placing her boot in his stirrup and her damaged hand in his. He pulled her up behind him as though she weighed nothing. and suddenly she was seated on the horse's rump, her arms instinctively wrapping around Nathaniel's waist to keep her balance. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, and her face burned with the intimacy of it even though she knew it was purely practical. They rode through town and out onto the open prairie, where Nathaniel's wagon waited under a stand of cottonwood trees near a creek. The wagon was loaded with supplies, sacks of grain and flour, coils of rope and various tools. A sturdy draft horse stood patiently in the traces, and Nathaniel helped Caroline down before beginning to transfer her bag to the wagon bed. "You can sit up front with me," he said, "or in the back if you would prefer. It is about 2 hours to the ranch." "I will sit with you," Caroline decided, and Nathaniel helped her up onto the wooden seat. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, and then they were moving, the wagon creaking and swaying as they headed west across the rolling grassland. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. Caroline was too overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the last hour to form coherent thoughts, and Nathaniel seemed content to let her process in silence. But eventually, she found her voice. "Why did you really choose me?" she asked quietly. "You could have hired any man in town, someone with experience running a ranch. Why offer a partnership to someone you saw scrubbing floors?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the reins as he guided the wagon around a rocky patch. "My father built our ranch from nothing," he finally said. "He came to Kansas after the war with nothing but determination and a dream. He worked himself half to death for 5 years before he had enough money to marry my mother, and even then they struggled. But they built something together, something that lasted." He paused, and Caroline saw a flicker of old pain cross his face. "When my mother got sick 3 years ago, my father fell apart. He could not bear to lose her, and when she died, he just gave up. He died 6 months later, and I think it was because his heart was broken. I inherited the ranch, and I have been working alone ever since, but I realized something. I do not want to build something just for myself. I want to build something that will last, something that matters. And to do that, I need a partner who understands what it means to fight for something worth having." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I will work hard," she promised. "I will not let you down." "I know you will not," Nathaniel said, and the simple confidence in his voice made something warm unfurl in her chest. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when they finally topped a rise, and Nathaniel pointed ahead. "There, that is the Cross Ranch." Caroline looked and felt her breath catch. The ranch spread out in a valley below them, with a sturdy wooden house, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses moved in the fading light. It was not grand, but it was solid and well-maintained, and there was something beautiful about the way it sat in the landscape, as though it belonged there. "It is wonderful," she breathed. Nathaniel smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. "Wait until you see the inside. I am not much of a housekeeper, I will warn you, but the structure is sound, and there is plenty of room." He drove the wagon down the slope and into the ranch yard, where several horses in the nearest corral raised their heads to watch their approach. A large yellow dog came bounding out from the barn, barking joyfully, and Nathaniel laughed. "That is Butter. She is friendly but has no manners whatsoever." The dog jumped around the wagon, her tail wagging furiously, and when Nathaniel helped Caroline down, Butter immediately began sniffing her skirts and whining for attention. Caroline bent to pet her, wincing as her damaged hands protested, and Butter licked her wrist as though trying to heal the wounds. "Let me show you the house," Nathaniel said. He grabbed her carpetbag and led her up the porch steps to the front door. The house was indeed a bit cluttered, with papers on the table and dishes in the sink, but it was clean enough and filled with comfortable furniture. There were curtains on the windows that a woman's hand had clearly made, and photographs on the mantel showing a handsome couple who must have been Nathaniel's parents. Your room is upstairs, Nathaniel said, leading her up a narrow staircase. There are 3 bedrooms. Mine is at the end of the hall, and this one was my mother's sewing room. I cleaned it out last week and brought in a proper bed and dresser. He opened a door to reveal a small but comfortable room with a window overlooking the corrals. The bed had a clean quilt, and there was a washstand with a pitcher and basin. To Caroline, who had been sleeping on a straw pallet in a basement for months, it looked like a palace. "It is perfect," she whispered. "I will let you settle in," Nathaniel said. "When you are ready, come down to the kitchen and we will do something about your hands before we make supper." He left her alone, and Caroline sank down onto the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. This morning, she had been scrubbing floors with bleeding hands, certain that her life would never be more than drudgery and pain. Now she was sitting in a comfortable room in a ranch house, about to become a business partner to a man who treated her with more respect than anyone had shown her in months. She unwrapped the bloody cloths from her hands and looked at the damage. The skin was raw and cracked, some cuts deep enough that they would take weeks to heal properly. But they would heal, she told herself. Everything would heal. After washing her face and hands as best she could in the basin, Caroline changed into her other dress, which was shabby but cleaner than the one she had been wearing. She brushed out her dark blonde hair and rebraided it, then made her way downstairs. Nathaniel was in the kitchen, pumping water into a large pot. When he saw her, he gestured to a chair. "Sit. I want to clean those hands properly before they get infected." Caroline sat, and Nathaniel brought over the pot of water, some clean cloths, and a tin of salve. He sat across from her and took her right hand in both of his, and Caroline was struck again by how gentle his touch was. He cleaned each wound carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration, and applied the salve with steady fingers. "This is going to sting," he warned before wrapping her hands in clean bandages. "The salve has carbolic acid in it, but it will help prevent infection." "Where did you learn to do this?" Caroline asked, watching his face. "Working on a ranch, you learn basic doctoring," Nathaniel said. "For both animals and people. I have set broken bones, stitched up cuts, and delivered foals. You learn because you have to." When both her hands were bandaged, he sat back and looked at her seriously. "For the next week, you are not doing any heavy work. Your hands need time to heal. I will handle the physical labor and you can start learning the books and inventory. I need to teach you how everything works anyway, so this is a good time for it." "I can work," Caroline protested. "I do not want you to think I am lazy." "I think you are the opposite of lazy," Nathaniel said firmly. "But I need you healthy and I need your hands to heal. A good partner knows when to push and when to rest. Trust me on this." Caroline nodded slowly and Nathaniel smiled. "Good. Now, I am going to teach you how to cook on a wood stove that has a temperamental left burner and a tendency to smoke when the wind is from the east." They made supper together, which consisted of fried ham, potatoes, and biscuits that Nathaniel mixed with practiced ease. Caroline was surprised to find him competent in the kitchen, and he explained that his mother had insisted he learn to cook when he was young. "She said a man who could not feed himself was only half a man," Nathaniel said with a grin. "She was a formidable woman. You would have liked her." They ate at the kitchen table, and Nathaniel asked Caroline about her life. She found herself telling him about her father, a schoolteacher who had moved to Kansas hoping the climate would help his weak lungs. It had not, and he had died 3 months after they arrived, leaving Caroline alone with no money and no prospects. "I tried to get work as a teacher," she said quietly, "but the school board said they preferred married women or men. I tried as a seamstress, but I do not have the skill for fine work. Eventually, I took what I could get, which was scrubbing floors and cleaning spittoons." "You will never have to do that again," Nathaniel said, and there was a promise in his voice that made Caroline's throat tighten. After supper, Nathaniel showed her his father's office, which was really just a corner of the parlor with a desk and several ledgers. He opened the books and began explaining his system for tracking expenses, income, cattle sales, and horse breeding. Caroline leaned over his shoulder, her bandaged hands resting on the desk, and absorbed everything like a sponge. "You have a good head for numbers," Nathaniel observed after she quickly calculated the profit margin on a horse sale. "Did your father teach you?" "Yes," Caroline said. "He believed women should be educated just as much as men. He taught me mathematics, literature, history, and Latin." "Latin?" Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "I am impressed. I can barely manage English most days." Caroline laughed, and she realized with a start that it was the first time she had genuinely laughed in months. Nathaniel smiled at the sound, and something passed between them, a spark of connection that made Caroline's heart skip. They worked on the books until full darkness had fallen, and then Nathaniel walked her to the bottom of the stairs. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow I will introduce you to the horses and show you the rest of the property. We have a lot of work ahead of us." "Thank you," Caroline said softly. "For everything. For seeing me, for giving me a chance. I will not forget it." "You do not need to thank me," Nathaniel said. "We are partners now. We help each other." Caroline climbed the stairs to her room, and as she lay in the comfortable bed, she could hear the prairie wind whistling around the house and the distant sound of horses moving in the corrals. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. She felt hopeful. And as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking about the way Nathaniel's hands had been so gentle on hers, and the warmth in his eyes when he smiled. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity and learning. Caroline's hands healed slowly, the raw wounds gradually closing and forming new skin. Nathaniel was true to his word, keeping her from heavy labor until she was fully recovered. Instead, he taught her everything about running the ranch. She learned how to keep the books properly, tracking every penny that came in and went out. She learned about breeding horses, which bloodlines were valuable, and which combinations produced the best working animals. She learned how to judge the quality of cattle, how to negotiate with buyers, and how to manage supplies so they never ran short of essentials. But she also learned about Nathaniel himself. She learned that he woke before dawn every morning and always started his day by checking on every animal personally. She learned that he had a gift for training horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animals with patience and understanding. She learned that he read books in the evening, everything from agricultural journals to poetry, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh, and Nathaniel learned about her. He discovered that she was fiercely intelligent and picked up new skills with remarkable speed. He found that she had a gift for organization, taking his somewhat chaotic record-keeping system and transforming it into something efficient and clear. He learned that she sang while she worked, old ballads her father had taught her, and that she had a stubborn streak that rivaled his own. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and spending evenings going over plans for the ranch. Caroline suggested they focus on breeding quality horses rather than trying to compete in the cattle market, where the big ranchers had all the advantages. Nathaniel listened to her reasoning and agreed, and they began developing a breeding program focused on sturdy, intelligent working horses. One evening in early May, about 6 weeks after Caroline had arrived, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Butter was sprawled at their feet, and the air was warm and sweet with the smell of prairie grass. "I have been thinking," Nathaniel said slowly, "that we should go to Abilene next week. There is a horse auction and I want you to see how they work. Plus, we need to order some supplies that the general store here cannot provide." Caroline tensed slightly at the mention of Abilene. She had not been back to town since the day Nathaniel had taken her away from the saloon, and part of her was afraid of what she might encounter there. But she also knew that she could not hide forever, and as Nathaniel's partner, she needed to be able to conduct business anywhere. "All right," she said, "I will go with you." Nathaniel glanced at her and she knew he understood what that agreement cost her. "No one will bother you," he said quietly. Not while you are with me. They made the trip to Abilene the following Tuesday, with Caroline wearing her best dress, which Nathaniel had insisted she order from the dressmaker in town the month before. It was a practical traveling dress in deep blue, but it was well made and fit her properly, and Caroline felt more confident than she had in the threadbare things she had owned before. The horse auction was held in a large corral on the edge of town, and Caroline stayed close to Nathaniel as they examined the animals being offered. He taught her what to look for, how to assess conformation and temperament, and how to spot potential problems. When the bidding started, Caroline watched in fascination as Nathaniel competed for a beautiful chestnut mare with excellent bloodlines. He won the bid, and Caroline felt a thrill of excitement at the thought of adding the mare to their breeding program. As they were arranging for the mare to be delivered to the ranch, Caroline heard a familiar voice behind her. Well, well, if it is not little Caroline Walsh. She turned to find Brennan standing there, his face twisted in a sneer. He looked shabbier than she remembered, his clothes stained and his eyes bloodshot. I heard you were playing at being a rancher now. How long do you think that will last? A month, too? He will get tired of you soon enough, and then where will you be? Caroline felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Nathaniel stepped between them. He did not raise his voice or make any threatening gesture, but there was something in his stance that made Brennan step back. Miss Walsh is my business partner, Nathaniel said coldly. She has more intelligence and capability in her little finger than you have in your entire body. If I hear that you have been spreading gossip about her or causing her any trouble, I will make it my personal business to ensure that every respectable person in this town knows exactly how you treat your employees. Am I clear? Brennan paled and muttered something before slinking away, and Caroline let out a shaky breath. Nathaniel turned to her, his expression softening. Are you all right? Yes, Caroline said, and she meant it. Thank you for defending me. Partners defend each other, Nathaniel said simply, but the look in his eyes made Caroline's heart race. They completed their business in town and headed back to the ranch as the sun was setting. On the way, Nathaniel told her about his plans for expanding the horse corrals and building a better training facility. Caroline offered suggestions, and they debated the best approach as the wagon rolled across the prairie. When they arrived home, Nathaniel helped Caroline down from the wagon, and his hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. Caroline looked up at him, and in the fading light, she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. But then Butter came bounding up, barking for attention, and the moment passed. Over the following months, the ranch thrived. The new mare proved to be an excellent addition to their breeding program, and two of their other mares produced strong, healthy foals that sold for good prices. Caroline's organizational skills and business acumen proved invaluable, and she negotiated several contracts that brought in steady income. But more than the ranch's success, something else was growing between Caroline and Nathaniel. It was there in the way he smiled when he saw her each morning, in the way she found herself looking for him throughout the day. It was in the accidental touches that seemed to happen more and more frequently, and in the long conversations they had in the evenings that ranged from practical matters to dreams and fears and hopes. Caroline tried to tell herself that it was just gratitude she felt, that she was confusing respect and partnership with something deeper. But she could not deny the way her heart leaped when Nathaniel praised her work, or the way she lay awake at night thinking about the strong line of his jaw and the warmth in his eyes. For his part, Nathaniel was equally tormented. He had offered Caroline a partnership because he genuinely needed help and because he admired her courage. But somewhere along the way, admiration had transformed into something much more powerful. He found himself making excuses to work near her, to hear her laugh, to catch the scent of the lavender soap she used. He lay awake in his room, knowing she was just down the hall, and fought the urge to go to her and tell her everything he felt, but he held back because he was afraid. afraid that she would think he had only hired her to seduce her, afraid that he would ruin the partnership they had built, afraid that she did not feel the same way. So he kept his feelings locked away and tried to be content with her friendship and partnership. The breaking point came in late August, during a thunderstorm that rolled across the prairie with terrifying force. Caroline had gone out to help secure the horses before the storm hit, and she was in the barn when the full fury of the weather arrived. Lightning cracked across the sky, and thunder shook the building, and one of the young horses panicked and broke free from its stall. Caroline tried to calm the frightened animal, but it reared up, its hooves flashing dangerously close to her head. She stumbled backward, knowing she was about to be trampled, when strong arms grabbed her and pulled her to safety. Nathaniel had seen the danger and run into the barn, and now he held her tight against his chest as the horse bolted past them and out into the storm. They stood there, breathing hard, and Caroline became aware that she was pressed against Nathaniel's body, his arms wrapped around her, his heart pounding against her cheek. She looked up at him, and in the dim light of the barn, she saw naked fear in his eyes. "You could have been killed," he said hoarsely. "But I was not," Caroline whispered. "You saved me." "Caroline," Nathaniel said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot pretend that you are just my partner, that I do not think about you every moment of every day. I know I should not feel this way. I know it could ruin everything we have built, but I am in love with you. I have been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you refusing to give up, refusing to let that bastard break your spirit." Caroline's breath caught and tears sprang to her eyes. "You love me." "Yes," Nathaniel said simply. "I love you so much it terrifies me. But if you do not feel the same, if you want to keep things as they are, I will respect that. I will never mention it again, and we can go on as partners. Your place here is secure regardless of your answer. I swear that to you." Caroline laughed, the sound breaking on a sob, and she reached up to cup his face in her hands. "You foolish man. I have been in love with you for months. I thought I was the only one. I thought you only saw me as a partner and nothing more." Nathaniel stared at her for a heartbeat, and then he was kissing her, his lips claiming hers with a desperate hunger that she matched with equal fervor. Caroline wound her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring months of longing and love into that single moment. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn, wrapped in Nathaniel's arms, Caroline had never felt safer or more complete. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know we have not courted properly. I know I should do this with flowers and pretty words, but I cannot wait. Marry me, Caroline. Be my wife, my partner in everything. Help me build a life that matters." "Yes," Caroline breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, softer this time, a kiss full of promise and joy. Outside, the storm began to ease, the thunder moving off into the distance, and when they finally left the barn hand in hand, the air smelled clean and fresh like new beginnings. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Abilene, with a few friends from neighboring ranches as witnesses. Caroline wore a dress of ivory silk that Nathaniel had insisted on buying her, and she carried a bouquet of prairie wildflowers. Nathaniel wore his best suit, and when he said his vows, his voice was strong and sure. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Nathaniel kissed Caroline, sealing their marriage, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. This man had seen her at her lowest point and offered her not pity but respect and opportunity. He had given her a chance to prove herself, and then he had given her his heart. They held a small celebration at the ranch, with a few neighbors bringing food and well wishes. As the sun set and their guests departed, Nathaniel took Caroline's hand and led her into the house, up the stairs to the room that had been his and was now theirs. He made love to her with the same gentleness and intensity that he brought to everything he did, worshiping her body with his hands and mouth, until she was gasping his name. Caroline discovered a passion in herself that she had never known existed, and they came together in a joining that felt both sacred and wildly joyful. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Caroline's head on Nathaniel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered. "I will love you for the rest of my life." "And I will love you beyond the end of mine," Nathaniel promised, pressing a kiss to her hair. The years that followed were filled with hard work, joy, and growth. The Cross Ranch became known throughout Kansas for producing some of the finest working horses in the state. Caroline's business acumen and Nathaniel's skill with horses proved to be an unbeatable combination, and they expanded steadily, buying additional land and building new facilities. But more precious than their business success was the life they built together. 2 years after their marriage, Caroline gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after her father. He had Nathaniel's dark hair and Caroline's gray eyes, and from the moment he was born, he had both his parents wrapped around his tiny finger. Nathaniel proved to be a devoted father, carrying Thomas around the ranch from the time he could hold his head up, teaching him about horses and cattle and the land. Caroline watched them together and felt her love for her husband deepen even further. 3 years after Thomas, they welcomed twin daughters, Emily and Sarah, who had Caroline's blonde hair and Nathaniel's warm brown eyes. The girls were fearless and curious, and as soon as they could walk, they were toddling after their father and older brother, demanding to be included in everything. The ranch house, once so quiet and orderly, became filled with the noise and chaos of children. There were toys scattered on the floor, childish drawings on the walls, and constant laughter echoing through the rooms. Caroline sometimes thought of the desperate, bleeding woman she had been, scrubbing floors in a dirty saloon, and marveled at how far she had come. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and the twins were 4, the family gathered on the porch after supper. The children were chasing fireflies in the yard, their laughter floating on the warm summer air, and Caroline sat with her head on Nathaniel's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Do you remember the day we met?" Caroline asked softly. "Every detail," Nathaniel said. "I walked into that saloon looking for a drink before I headed to the land office, and I saw you scrubbing floors with blood dripping from your hands. I knew in that moment that I was seeing someone extraordinary, someone who refused to be defeated no matter what life threw at her." "You saved me," Caroline said. "No," Nathaniel corrected gently. "I gave you an opportunity, but you saved yourself. You took a chance on a stranger and his half-wild dream, and you made it into something real and lasting." Caroline turned to kiss him, a soft press of lips that still had the power to make her heart race even after years of marriage. "We made it together," she said. "That is what partners do." As the years continued to pass, the Cross Ranch grew into one of the most successful horse breeding operations in Kansas. Thomas grew into a capable young man who shared his parents' love for the land and the animals. Emily and Sarah developed into strong, intelligent young women who could ride as well as any man, and had their mother's gift for business. When Thomas was 22, he married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a spirited woman named Margaret who fit into the family as though she had always been there. Emily and Sarah chose different paths, with Emily becoming a veterinarian after attending college in the East, and Sarah taking over much of the ranch's business operations. Nathaniel and Caroline watched their children build their own lives with pride and joy, but they remained at the heart of the ranch, still working side by side as they had from the beginning. Their hair turned gray, their hands grew weathered with work and time, but the love between them never dimmed. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Nathaniel took Caroline back to the barn where he had first kissed her during that long-ago thunderstorm. The building had been expanded and improved over the years, but the basic structure was the same. "Do you remember?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "How could I forget?" Caroline said, smiling. "You told me you loved me, and I thought my heart would burst." "I still love you," Nathaniel said. "More than I did that day, if that is possible. You are the best decision I ever made, Caroline Cross." We were the best decision we ever made, Caroline corrected. Together, we built something that will last long after we are gone. We built a family, a legacy, and a love that nothing could break. They stood there in the barn, holding each other as they had 30 years before, and Caroline thought about the long journey that had brought them from that moment to this. She thought about the bleeding hands and the desperation, about the leap of faith she had taken when she chose to trust a stranger. She thought about all the years of work and love and partnership that had followed. And she knew that if she could go back and live her life again, she would not change a single moment, because every joy and every struggle had led her here, to this place, to this man, to this beautiful life they had created together. As Thomas eventually took over more of the daily operations of the ranch, Nathaniel and Caroline found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They took long rides across the prairie, just the two of them, remembering the early days when it had been only them against the world. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, content in the silence that came from decades of knowing each other completely. When Caroline was 68 and Nathaniel 72, they celebrated the marriage of their youngest grandchild, Sarah's daughter, with a gathering that brought together 3 generations of the Cross family. The ranch house and yard were filled with people, and as Caroline looked around at all the faces, all the lives that had grown from the partnership she and Nathaniel had forged, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, as they prepared for bed, Nathaniel pulled Caroline into his arms and held her close. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" Caroline asked. "For taking a chance on me, for building this life with me, for loving me all these years." Caroline pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, those warm brown eyes that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "For looking at a woman scrubbing floors with bleeding hands and seeing not someone to pity, but someone worth knowing. You gave me back my dignity, and then you gave me love and partnership and a life beyond anything I could have dreamed." They made love that night with the tender familiarity of long marriage, and afterward, Caroline fell asleep in Nathaniel's arms, exactly where she had belonged for more than 40 years. They lived on together at the ranch for another decade, watching their great-grandchildren be born and begin to run through the same corrals and fields where their own children had played. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, with Emily's veterinary expertise and Sarah's business skills supporting the operation. Nathaniel passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, and Caroline held his hand and told him one last time how much she loved him. She grieved deeply, but not bitterly, because they had been blessed with a full life together, and she knew that the love they had shared would continue in their children and grandchildren. Caroline lived for 5 more years, remaining active in the ranch operations and spending as much time as possible with her growing family. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about how he had walked into a saloon one day and offered a bleeding, desperate woman a partnership instead of pity. She told them about building the ranch together, about the storms they had weathered and the joys they had celebrated. And when Caroline passed away at the age of 87, surrounded by the family she and Nathaniel had created, she died with a smile on her face, knowing that she had lived a life filled with purpose, partnership, and profound love. The Cross Ranch continued for generations, but at its heart was always the story of the cowboy who saw a woman scrubbing floors with bleeding hands and recognized her strength. It was the story of 2 people who took a chance on each other and built something extraordinary together. It was a story of partnership, respect, and a love that transcended the hardships of the Wild West and created a legacy that would endure forever. And in the family Bible, carefully preserved in the ranch house, someone had written in faded ink, "Caroline Walsh Cross, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and partner. She built an empire from bleeding hands and an unbreakable spirit. Her love and legacy live on in all of us." The end.